Beautiful, Robert. Thank you. The King of Love, my shepherd is. We're in the season of Lent, as you know, the third Sunday in the season of Lent today. And I'm so grateful that we have the ability for being able still to worship together, though virtually. Barry Hudson, who heads up our media ministry, our television ministry, and has done so since its inception, shared with me this morning that last week was the 45th anniversary of the television ministry and how it's changed through all the years and how things were done in the beginning and how they are now. And it is a blessing, and I appreciate Barry and the volunteers who and staff who make this possible for us to be together in this way. I also want to thank Elaine Johnson and Barbara Duckworth and Sharon Wynn for creating this beautiful altar piece. I hope that you can see it at home or wherever you are because they've created a piece that reminds us of the image that we're looking at today. We're in this series, I Am. It's the I Am sayings of Jesus in the Gospel of John. And as we've said, the Gospel of John is different from the other Gospels. It's the only Gospel that contains these sayings. John wants us to understand the nature of Christ, and so John does it through these I Am sayings of Jesus. We started 2 weeks ago with I am the bread of life, and that's an image that we can understand. I mean, after all, we receive Holy Communion. We understand what it means to be nourished by bread and how Jesus talked about life all the time, and abundant life. And then last week, we looked at Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. And in that saying, we can also understand the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. The true light that enlightens everyone, John says, was coming into the world. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and he's talking about Jesus, of course. But the I am saying today is a bit different because it's a little strange. Jesus says, I am the gate. I am the gate. What does that mean? Well, it's a shepherd image. Next week, we will hear Jesus say, I am the good shepherd, and we'll be talking about that. But this is also a shepherd image. And you have to understand something about the way shepherds operated and how they worked and how sheep were cared for in the first century, and even in some places up to today. Shepherds didn't drive their sheep. They still don't in the Middle East. Sheep are led. And the shepherd knows the names of the sheep. The sheep all have pet names like we would name our pets, and they recognize the voice of the shepherd, and all this is captured in this image. But the gate, I am the gate, Jesus says. What does that mean? Well, picture a sheepfold. Maybe it's round, sometimes they were square, made out of stone usually, and on top of that stone would be thorns. They're up on that stone fence to prevent predators from getting over into the sheepfold, or to prevent a thief from getting into the fold. And then there's an opening. But there's no gate. There's no swinging gate in that opening. Rather, the shepherd himself would lie down in the opening when the sheep were securely in the fold and become the gate. Now, this system of the shepherd becoming the gate, of lying in the opening so that a thief could not pass or that a predator could not pass, and sleeping there for the night, was part of a security system for the sheep. The other part of that security system was voice recognition, the voice of the shepherd. And in our passage for today, we see both of those things. It's these images that speak to us especially, I think, now in this time. That Christ is the good shepherd. And we'll be talking about that one particularly next week. But that Christ is the gate. And that he knows the sheep by name, and the sheep recognize his voice. That's a powerful image for our time. Because those are images that help us understand something about the quality of this thing that Jesus calls abundant life. In our passage you heard a moment ago, which is from the Common English Bible, it uses a little bit different language. It talks about a fulfilled life. It's the same kind of thing, an abundant life, a life that's overflowing in some important way. And that abundant life comes from knowing that we have a good shepherd who is at the gate. That we learn to recognize his voice. And both of those are really important things. Because there are a lot of voices that are speaking to us today, coming from every direction. Discerning the voice of the shepherd is something that is important for us. I think maybe more important now than ever before to discern what is the divine voice in all this noise. What's the divine message that we need to hear and we need to follow in our lives today? It would be a message, we can be sure, that would call us to continued growth, to continued understanding in our lives of faith. Jesus constantly led his disciples to new experiences. He caused them to go to places where they would not otherwise have gone. He challenged them with these parables that sometimes were difficult to understand, always calling them to continue to grow in their faith. That's the divine voice. You remember the story of the Transfiguration? Jesus takes James and John and Simon Peter up on a mountain, and they have this amazing religious experience up there, and Simon Peter says, in essence, why don't we just stay here? I'll build 3 booths, and we can just stay up here. And of course, it says Simon did not know what he was saying. You don't stay in one place. Even if it's a mountaintop experience, you don't stay there. You move, you go down into the valley where life is lived and where the needs are, and that's exactly where Jesus leads those 3 disciples. The divine voice is one that says, keep learning, keep moving, keep questioning, go deeper in your faith. The divine voice is one that always calls us to be better, always calls us as God's people in the world to reflect who Jesus is in the way we live our lives and the decisions we make. It's always the voice that calls us to be loving, never a voice that calls us to hate. It's important to discern these voices because there are other voices, aren't there? I mean, there are prominent examples you can think of, some cult leader like Jim Jones or a cult leader that leads a whole group of people to do something destructive, even to suicide bombers, all claiming to be the divine voice. And so discerning the voice of the shepherd that always calls us to be more loving, always calls us to reach out, always calls us to do as Jesus did, who was always gathering people to himself. This image of Jesus as the gate today in this crisis that we're facing is particularly powerful for us. It's Eugene Peterson's translation, The Message, that I really appreciate here. He takes that important word saved that's in this passage and he translates it in a broader way that really gets at the meaning of the Greek word. Soter is the Greek word. That deeper meaning is cared for. And that's the way he translates it in the Message. I'm the gate, and the sheep may go in and out freely and be cared for. It's the presence of God with us. It's the presence of the resurrected Christ that enables us to sing the song we sang a moment ago, that God is with us, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, that God cares for us. And no matter what happens, God is present. And no matter what happens, it will be okay. It will be okay because of who God is, that we see perfectly revealed in Jesus. I want to close with a story that I shared with you a few years ago, and it's really been on my mind this week. One of my favorite professors in college, Mike Marshall knew him well, Webb Pomeroy, a religion professor at Centenary College. When Dr. Pomeroy became critically ill with an incurable disease that eventually took his life, he had a story to tell. They played that story at his funeral service that I attended in Shreveport in the chapel of Centenary College. And it was a powerful experience to hear his voice tell the story. It was from an interview that he had given. He was hospitalized in LSU Medical Center there, and they broke the news to him that he had this rare condition and that it would take his life. There was no cure for it. He said that they sent a chaplain to see him after that news, and the chaplain said that I've come to pray for you. And so typical of Dr. Pomeroy, he said, well, okay, but before you do that, there's a child 1 floor down that's being fitted for braces today. If you're going to pray for somebody, why don't you pray that child will be able to walk? And then he said, all right, now you can pray. So the chaplain prayed for him. And Pomeroy said, when I was a kid, my father took me fishing all the time. And he said, I don't ever remember saying to my dad, Daddy, if I fall in the lake, will you get me out? He said, I don't remember ever saying to my dad, Daddy, please don't throw me in the lake. He said, I knew that whatever happened, it would be okay because he was there. And I didn't have to ask him for that. I just knew it. So I think that chaplain maybe got a lesson that day. I certainly did in that service, because he reminded me of the good news that whatever happens, God is present with us. Always. And that's the good news of our faith. And in a special way, when we care for one another, God is present in an even more powerful way. Normally, at the end of our worship services, we say our gathering will soon be ended. We're not to the end just yet. But let me say this. We still are God's people in the world. And wherever we are, God is with us. And wherever we are still called to be followers who listen for the voice of the shepherd and follow that voice. Amen.